In review, evolutionists believe a tiny hot ball of non-intelligent matter that ultimately came from nothing and nowhere, exploded violently, and eventually created, among other things, a chaotic primordial soup of dead particles and energy from which the first intricately ordered cells of life randomly sprung. Although we have already considered the logical, scientific, and statistical impossibility of this scenario, please temporarily imagine with evolutionists that non-intelligent matter really created itself before it existed, the Big Bang actually occurred, and original bacterial life truly arose from the dead particles of a disorganized primordial soup. Founded upon their monumental assumption all these events happen, evolutionists then suggest mutations and natural selection, which is survival of the fittest genes in a population, are the main shaping factors that cause primitive life to evolve into the awesome diversity of intricately ordered living organisms we now see. Evolutionists declare molecules demand macroevolution is certain, since we can observe species forming with the passage of time through these mechanisms. Some evolutionists have also argued biblical creationists are wrong, since they say we believe God made fixed, rigid, and unchanging life forms, but this is definitely not what the Bible teaches. The Bible does not claim static uniformity, but rather diversity in genetics and phenotypes, which are the outward display of inward genetics among individuals of a kind. The Bible also allows the possibility for new species to form within an original kind, such as the dog kind, cat kind, cattle kind, frog kind, and horse kind that possess a large gene pool. The phenotypic diversity which may result from an original gene pool is expressed well by humankind. Scientists have estimated that, if it was physically possible, one human couple could produce far more children than all the atoms in our known universe without birthing two identical offspring. Humankind is an excellent example of the incredible genetic diversity God has installed within each created kind to allow their successful adaptation to various earthly habitats through the loss of unsuitable genes and expression of suitable phenotypes. This wonderful design promotes the survival of each created kind. With this understanding, we can agree with evolutionists that species may, through natural selection and the passage of time, form within original kinds, especially when they are geographically isolated into unique environments. Natural selection is a good explanation for how species adapt to environmental change through the shifting of existing genetic information, but it does not explain how one kind of creature can change into an entirely new kind of organism. For example, it simply can't explain how dogs can turn into whales, dinosaurs became birds, or bacteria became humans. We know from both the fossil record and the present observable reality that despite the great diversity within their kind, dogs produce only dogs. Cats, again despite their great variety, have never produced any creature other than more cats. Butterflies have always birthed only butterflies. Likewise, we've seen that chimps produce only chimps. Finches, despite their different beak shapes and sizes, are still finches and nothing else, so no molecules to men scale evolution has occurred. Pepper and moths, despite their icon status within the evolutionary worldview, have been and are still pepper and moths regardless of whatever color they appear. Literally 110 years and several thousand generations of shape-twisting genetic manipulation have failed to change fruit flies into something other than fruit flies, so no bacteria to biologist scale evolution has occurred in their case either. Speaking of bacteria, even the countless mutations they've undergone have failed to turn them into anything other than bacteria. So again, they have not changed in the way evolutionary theory requires. In fact, a famous 20-year-long experiment producing 40,000 consecutive E. coli bacteria generations demonstrated not only did they remain bacteria, but they actually became less viable as genetic mutations accumulated. Had the experiment continued, scientists would not have observed bacteria changing into a superior organism, but rather bacteria driven to extinction by overwhelming mutational genetic entropy, which is the opposite of particles to people evolution. It really doesn't matter to the so-called evolution versus creation debate if natural selection and mutation is capable of forming a new, reproductively isolated species or not, for this would still not constitute evidence for molecules to demand macroevolution, since a species loses genetic information whenever it changes. For an original unicellular life form with only 100,000 DNA base pairs to ultimately become a human with 3.2 billion base pairs per DNA molecule requires an immense addition of genetic information. Since the primary evolutionary mechanisms of natural selection and mutation cause a loss of genetic information, they actually promote the opposite of Darwinian evolution and surely cannot explain how complicated organisms like humans can arise from lifeless molecules or even living bacteria. The challenge for evolutionary theory is actually far worse than merely needing to explain bacteria to biologists' evolution, since the world contains an astounding array of at least 1,899,567 different species, with countless extinct creatures known from the fossil record. So, according to the theory, the hypothetical basic original life form with limited genetic material must have created the astronomical genetic variety existing within all living organisms without a proper mechanism to do so, since natural selection and mutations have never been observed to add new, positive, and purposeful information to the genome. Dr. Lee Spetner from Johns Hopkins University stated in his scholarly and highly researched book, Not by Chance, that the neo-Darwinian theory is supposed to explain how the information of life has been built up by evolution. The essential biological difference between a human and a bacterium is in the information they contain. All other biological differences follow from that. The human genome has much more information than the bacterial genome. Information cannot be built up by mutations that lose it. He further explained following his studies that all point mutations that have been studied on a molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not to increase it. Not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information to the genome. That surely shows there are not millions upon millions of potential mutations the theory demands. There may well not be any. The failure to observe even one mutation that adds information is more than just a failure to find support for the theory. It is evidence against the theory. We have here a serious challenge against the neo-Darwinian theory. Harvard evolutionist Richard Lewontin recognized the limitations of natural selection by admitting, natural selection operates essentially to enable organisms to maintain their state of adaptation rather than to improve it. Alfred Russel Wallace, often considered co-inventor of the natural selection theory, later abandoned it upon closer examination of the evidence. He concluded, I found this argument for natural selection convincing until I attempted to explain the advanced state of human faculties. Wallace realized an exceedingly complex human could not have arisen by chance from much simpler bacteria and concluded, a superior intelligence has guided the development of man in a definite direction and for a special purpose. Many former evolutionists have reached the same conclusion. While recounting the results of a conference involving the world's leading evolutionists in Chicago, Roger Lewin reported, the central question of the Chicago conference was whether the mechanisms, mutation and natural selection, underlying microevolution, which means adaptation, can be extrapolated to explain the phenomenon of molecules to men macroevolution. At the risk of doing violence to the positions of some of the people at the meeting, the answer can be given as a clear no. Some evolutionists are beginning to doubt natural selection and mutation are the driving force behind supposed molecules to man macroevolution, while others still trusting in these mechanisms are simply sweeping facts under the rug. Evolutionary theory is a faith whose foundation is crumbling on all sides.